There is a flash of light that happens roughly 1.2 seconds after your rear tire crosses a white line, and if you do the math wrong, it will follow you in an envelope for 6 to 8 weeks. Welcome to Catastrophe Theory, where we figure out exactly how fast your life falls apart if you actually let the intrusive thoughts win. I'm CJ Theory, and today we're looking at what happens when you decide in a half-second of yellow light panic that you are smarter than a steel pole bolted into a concrete median. You are stopped at a red light. Not the first car in line, the third, maybe the fourth. It's early evening, that particular shade of blue that isn't quite dusk yet, and your dashboard clock says you're 11 minutes late for something that matters to you. The light ahead is green, but you can see it, that subtle shift, the way a green light seems to hold its breath right before it changes. Your foot hovers between the brake and the gas. Somewhere in your peripheral vision, mounted on a gray pole at the corner, is a small rectangular box with a lens that looks, if you're being honest with yourself, a little bit like it's watching you specifically. And that's when the thought arrives. Not a plan, not really, more like a whisper. What if I just didn't stop? What if I timed it? What if there's a way to beat it? I've spent a strange amount of time talking to traffic engineers, camera technicians, a couple of very patient municipal clerks, and at least one person who tried to argue his way out of a ticket using trigonometry he did not actually understand. And what I've learned is that the red light camera is one of the most misunderstood pieces of infrastructure in modern life, not because it's complicated, but because everyone assumes they understand it better than they do. So today, we're going to open up the box. We're going to look at the sensors, the timing, the legal fine print, and the physics of what actually happens in the fraction of a second when you decide to gamble against a machine that was built, quite literally, to never blink. Let's begin. Here's the thing nobody tells you about that moment at the intersection. It isn't really a decision, not in the way we like to think of decisions, with pros and cons and a calm weighing of options. It's a reflex wearing the costume of a choice. Your brain under time pressure isn't consulting a rule book, it's pattern matching against every other yellow light you've ever driven through, and it's doing that pattern matching in about 400 milliseconds, less time than it takes you to blink twice. Picture the intersection from above, like a diagram in a driver ed manual nobody actually read. The white stop line, a few feet before it, buried in the asphalt or embedded as a small sensor puck, a device that can sense the mass and speed of your car. Above and behind it, the pole, the camera, sometimes a radar unit, sometimes both. The system is not, contrary to popular belief, sitting there waiting to catch you. It's sitting there doing math, continuously, about every vehicle that approaches, and it only wakes up, really wakes up, when two conditions happen at once. The light is red, and a vehicle crosses the trigger point. That's the entire secret. That's the whole trick. There is no cleverness required to avoid it, but there is an enormous amount of cleverness people apply anyway, trying to outsmart a system that isn't actually asking to be outsmarted. It's just asking you to stop. So why do we try anyway? Why does a rational, otherwise law-abiding person suddenly start doing back-of-napkin physics at 40 miles an hour? I think it's because red light cameras occupy a strange psychological space. They don't feel like a police officer. There's no human being to make eye contact with, no chance to explain that you were rushing to the hospital or that the sun was in your eyes. It's a machine, and machines feel beatable in a way that people don't. We've all grown up on stories of hackers outsmarting systems, of loopholes and workarounds. So somewhere in the reptile brain, the red light camera doesn't register as law enforcement, it registers as a puzzle. And that reframing is exactly where things start to go wrong. Let's talk about what's actually happening under that intersection, because once you understand the mechanism, the outsmarting fantasy falls apart almost immediately. The trigger. Most red light camera systems rely on one of two detection methods. The older, more common method uses inductive loop sensors, coils of wire embedded in the road surface, usually in a rectangular or circular pattern positioned just before the stop line and sometimes a second loop just after it, inside the intersection. These loops generate a small magnetic field. When a mass of metal, your car, passes over them, it disturbs that field in a measurable way. The system reads that disturbance as a vehicle has crossed this point. Newer systems increasingly use radar or video analytics detection instead, tracking vehicles optically or via Doppler shift, which allows for more flexible zones and eliminates the need to cut into the road surface. Either way, the underlying logic is identical. The system is asking a single yes or no question over and over, many times a second. Is the light red, and did a vehicle just cross the travel? That's the entire secret. That's the whole trick. There is no cleverness required to avoid it, but there is an enormous amount of cleverness people apply anyway, trying to outsmart a system that isn't actually asking to be outsmarted. It's just asking you to stop. So why do we try anyway? Why does a rational, otherwise law-abiding person suddenly start doing back-of-napkin physics at 40 miles an hour? I think it's because red light cameras occupy a strange psychological space. They don't feel like a police officer. There's no human being to make eye contact with, no chance to explain that you were rushing to the hospital or that the sun was in your eyes. It's a machine, and machines feel beatable in a way that people don't. We've all grown up on stories of hackers outsmarting systems, of loopholes and workarounds. So somewhere in the reptile brain, the red light camera doesn't register as law enforcement, it registers as a puzzle. And that reframing is exactly where things start to go wrong. Let's talk about what's actually happening under that intersection, because once you understand the mechanism, the outsmarting fantasy falls apart almost immediately. The trigger. Most red light camera systems rely on one of two detection methods. The older, more common method uses inductive loop sensors, coils of wire embedded in the road surface, usually in a rectangular or circular pattern, positioned just before the stop line and sometimes a second loop just after it, inside the intersection. These loops generate a small magnetic field. When a mass of metal, your car, passes over them, it disturbs that field in a measurable way. The system reads that disturbance as a vehicle has crossed this point. Newer systems increasingly use radar or video analytics detection instead, tracking vehicles optically or via Doppler shift, which allows for more flexible zones and eliminates the need to cut into the road surface. Either way, the underlying logic is identical. The system is asking a single yes or no question, over and over, many times a second. Is the light red, and did a vehicle just cross the threshold? Think of it less like a trap and more like a very literal-minded security guard standing at a door with a stopwatch, who doesn't care about your excuse, your intentions, or your day. He only checks two things. Was the door marked closed, and did you walk through it anyway? The timing window. This is where most of the folklore lives. People love to believe there's a magic number, that if you're going fast enough or if you enter on the tail end of yellow, the system simply won't catch you. There's a kernel of truth buried in that myth, and understanding the kernel is more interesting than the myth itself. Yellow light durations aren't arbitrary. Engineers calculate them using something close to a physics formula that accounts for the posted speed limit, an assumed driver reaction time, usually around 1 second, and the deceleration rate needed to stop comfortably. The result is typically somewhere between 3 and 6 seconds, depending on the speed of the road. The system is not designed to catch you the instant the light turns red. Most jurisdictions build in what's sometimes informally called a grace period, a fraction of a second, often somewhere around a quarter to half a second between the light turning red and the trigger actually arming. This isn't a loophole for you to exploit. It exists because engineers know that vehicles already committed to the intersection when the light changes need a moment to clear it safely. It's a safety margin, not a starting gun for a game. Here's the part that surprises people. The camera doesn't care how you got there. It doesn't matter if you sped up, slowed down, prayed, or closed your eyes. It only cares about one snapshot in time, where your car's front wheels were relative to the stop line at the exact instant the light turned red, and whether your car's mass continued through the intersection afterwards. There is no clever entry angle, there is no secret velocity that renders you invisible. The sensor is binary. You were there or you weren't. The evidence chain. Once triggered, most systems don't take a single photo, they take a sequence. Typically, one image captures the vehicle approaching the stop line with the red light visible in frame. A second captures the vehicle inside the intersection, still with the red light visible, ideally showing the license plate clearly. Many modern systems also record a short video clip, several seconds long, bracketing the violation. Some systems even capture a third image confirming the vehicle has cleared the intersection, just to close the visual narrative for any court proceeding. This layered evidence exists specifically to defend against a familiar defense: the light was actually still yellow, or I couldn't tell how far along the light was. The multi-image time-stamped sequence, cross-referenced with the traffic signal's own internal phase logs, is designed to be almost impossible to argue against on technical grounds. In most jurisdictions, before a ticket is ever mailed, a trained reviewer, usually a police officer or specially certified technician, manually inspects the image sequence to confirm the violation before approving the citation. The system doesn't self-issue tickets blindly. There's a human check built into a process people assume is fully automated. So let's walk through the common tactics people try and what actually happens mechanically when they try them. Speeding up on yellow, hoping to beat the light. This doesn't outsmart the system, it just increases your odds of one of two bad outcomes. Either you clear the intersection legally before the light changes, which was always going to happen if you simply maintained a legal speed and gave yourself enough stopping distance, or you don't clear it in time, and now you've triggered the camera while traveling at a higher, more dangerous speed right through a space where cross-traffic is beginning to move. Slamming the brakes at the last second to avoid the trigger, this doesn't disable the sensor. It just means you stop abruptly, often well past a safe following distance, frequently in a position that puts you at serious risk of being rear-ended by the vehicle behind you, which was not expecting a full stop. Covering or obscuring the license plate. This is where the clever workaround fantasy runs headlong into the legal system. Nearly every jurisdiction that operates red light cameras also has separate, specific statutes criminalizing plate obstruction. Spray, covers, tinted plastic, tilted mounts, even strategically placed trailer hitches. These laws typically predate red light cameras entirely because obscured plates have always been a problem for basic law enforcement and toll collection. Attempting to beat a camera this way doesn't erase the violation, it simply adds a second, often more serious charge, because plate obstruction frequently carries its own fine and, in some states, points on your license, or even a criminal misdemeanor classification, stacked directly on top of the original red light violation, which the camera operator or reviewing officer can often still identify from the vehicle's make, model, and the second or third photo in the sequence. Driving through with your headlights positioned to create glare on the lens. Modern cameras are built with glare compensation and infrared flash technology specifically because this was tried enough times that manufacturers engineered around it years ago. Here's the quiet, almost philosophical truth sitting underneath all of this. Every single outsmarting strategy requires you to become a worse driver in the process of trying to defeat a device designed to measure exactly how good a driver you are being in that moment. The system isn't a riddle, it's a mirror. Quick question before we move into the myths, because I think it's the one that actually matters most. If the ticket itself is often just a fine, annoying but survivable, why does this feel so high stakes? Why does the intrusive thought show up at all? Stick with me, because the answer isn't really about money. Let's take the 4 beliefs I hear most often, dismantle them one at a time, and replace the folklore with the actual mechanics. Myth: if you're not the registered owner, you can't get in trouble. Reality: in the vast majority of jurisdictions that use red light cameras, the ticket is issued to the vehicle's registered owner, not necessarily the driver, and it's typically classified as a civil infraction rather than a criminal moving violation, meaning no points against a license but a fine owed regardless of who was actually behind the wheel. Why it's false, or at least incomplete. People hear "not a criminal violation" and mentally translate that into "not enforceable," which is a dangerous leap. Civil infractions are still legally binding debts. Ignore them long enough and many jurisdictions escalate. Additional late fees, referral to collections, and in some places a hold placed on vehicle registration renewal until the fine is paid. You can't simply out-argue the concept of ownership. Some states do allow an owner to formally name the actual driver to shift liability, but that requires an affidavit process, not a shrug and a "wasn't me." Myth: there's a legal loophole where the yellow light has to be a certain length or the ticket is automatically void. Reality: this one has a genuine kernel of truth buried inside a mountain of internet exaggeration. Yellow light timing standards do exist, generally derived from engineering guidelines tied to the posted speed limit, and there have been real documented cases, including well-publicized ones, where cities were caught shortening yellow light durations below the engineering standard, specifically to increase citation revenue. When that happens, and when it's proven, it has led to canceled contracts, dismissed tickets, and public scandals. Why it's false, as a general strategy? The existence of a few documented abuses does not mean every yellow light is secretly too short, and it definitely doesn't mean you can walk into traffic court and simply assert, "I think the light was too fast," without engineering documentation to back it up. Courts require actual timing data, often from the municipality's own signal logs, to sustain this defense. It is not a magic phrase, it is a technical claim that requires technical proof, and most drivers who try it without evidence lose. You can't get a ticket if you're already in the intersection when the light turns red, even if you haven't cleared it. Reality: this one is actually mostly true, and this is important because it's one of the few pieces of camera folklore that reflects how the systems are genuinely designed. If your vehicle legally entered the intersection when the light was still yellow, and you're simply completing the crossing or a turn as the light changes, most systems and most traffic laws do not consider that a violation. The violation is about when you entered relative to the stop line, not about lingering inside the intersection afterwards. Why the myth still causes trouble? People extend this true exception into a false one, assuming that any presence in the intersection at the moment of a red light is automatically excused. It isn't. If you weren't already committed, if you were still approaching the stop line, and you accelerate into the intersection after the light has turned red, the trigger already fired the moment you crossed the line on red. The exception protects drivers who were legitimately caught mid-crossing, not drivers who used it as cover to run the light late. Myth: the tickets don't hold up in court, so it's basically a scam and you can simply ignore them. Reality: red light camera tickets absolutely can be and regularly are successfully contested. But successfully contested and can be safely ignored are two entirely different outcomes, and confusing them is where people get into real trouble. Some cases do get dismissed on procedural grounds: a photo where the plate is genuinely unreadable, a documented calibration lapse in the sensor equipment, a break in the chain of custody for the evidence, or, as mentioned, a provably shortened yellow interval. These are real, legitimate defenses that real people win with, but they require you to actually show up, actually contest it, and actually bring evidence. Why the "just ignore it" version is false and often costly? A citation that isn't formally contested and isn't paid doesn't quietly disappear. It typically converts into a default judgment, which can trigger increased fines, collections referrals, and in a meaningful number of states, a hold on vehicle registration renewal, meaning you can't legally re-register your car, and in some places, you can't renew your license until the debt is resolved. Ignoring a red light ticket doesn't outsmart the system either. It just changes which department eventually catches up with you. Notice the pattern across all 4 myths. None of them are about beating physics. Every single one is about people misunderstanding process, timing, or jurisdiction, and mistaking that confusion for a loophole. The camera isn't the trick. The paperwork is where people actually lose. So if the myths don't hold up and the clever tricks make things worse, what's left? What do you actually do, both in the half-second at the intersection and in the weeks after if that envelope does show up? That's next. Here is your checklist, not for outsmarting the camera because we've established that's the wrong goal entirely, but for making sure the system and your own judgment work the way they're supposed to. 1. Learn your intersection, not just your route. If you drive through the same camera-equipped intersection regularly, pay attention over time to how long the yellow actually runs at that specific light. Familiarity isn't cheating. It's the same situational awareness that makes any experienced driver safer than a distracted one. 2. Establish your stopping decision early, not at the line. The moment you see a yellow turned yellow, your brain needs to answer one question immediately. Can I stop safely and comfortably at my current speed, or am I already too close and too fast to do so without slamming the brakes? Make that call the instant the yellow appears, not 2 seconds later when you're already at the trigger point negotiating with physics. 3. When in doubt, stop. This sounds almost insultingly simple, but it's the actual engineering-backed answer. The entire yellow light duration formula assumes a driver who defaults to stopping unless already committed. When you're uncertain, the system was built around the assumption that you'll choose the brake. 4. Maintain following distance, specifically at signaled intersections. A huge percentage of camera-adjacent accidents aren't caused by the car that gets the ticket. They're caused by the car behind it, tailgating, that wasn't expecting a sudden stop. Give yourself room to brake without becoming someone else's rear-end collision statistic. 5. If you get a ticket, read it fully before reacting emotionally. Most citations include the specific statute, the review process, the deadline to contest, and instructions for requesting the actual photo or video evidence. Panic Googling how to beat a red light camera ticket at 11 at night is a worse strategy than simply reading the 4 corners of the document you were mailed. 6. Request the evidence if you intend to contest. You are generally entitled to review the actual images or video used against you. Look specifically at the position of your vehicle relative to the stop line in the first image and cross-reference the timestamp against your own memory of the light cycle. If something looks genuinely off, an obscured plate, a timestamp inconsistency, a light that appears to still be transitioning, that's your actual defense, not a hunch about physics you half remember from a video online. 7. If you believe the yellow interval was too short, request the engineering data. Many jurisdictions are legally required to provide signal timing logs upon formal request. This is tedious, unglamorous, paperwork-heavy work, and it's also the only version of beating the system that has any real track record of success. 8. Never obstruct, alter, or cover your license plate to avoid detection. Beyond the standalone legal risk, a plate that can't be read by a red light camera also can't be read by emergency responders, by witnesses to an accident you're involved in, or by a parking attendant who needs to identify a car blocking a fire lane. The plate isn't just for the camera, it's for every version of you that might need to be found and helped. 9. If a ticket goes unpaid past the deadline for financial reasons, contact the issuing office rather than going silent. Many municipalities offer payment plans or fine reduction programs for documented hardship. A dropped call is treated very differently than a documented conversation. 10. Teach the lesson forward, especially to new drivers. The instinct to beat a yellow light is disproportionately common in newer, younger drivers still calibrating their own reaction time and stopping distance. A 5-minute conversation about how yellow lights are actually timed can meaningfully change a habit before it becomes a pattern. None of this is about fear. It's about giving the half-second back to you, turning a reflexive gamble into an informed, almost boring decision, made calmly, before you're anywhere near the intersection at all. Here's where I want to leave you, because I don't think the honest ending to this topic is a warning. I think it's something closer to appreciation. A red light camera, stripped of all the anxiety we project onto it, is a remarkably unglamorous piece of engineering built to solve a remarkably unglamorous problem. A small percentage of drivers, under time pressure, will make a dangerous choice. And that choice doesn't just endanger the driver making it, it endangers the pedestrian stepping off a curb on a walk signal, the cyclist entering the intersection on their green, the family in the minivan trusting that a red light means the cross traffic has actually stopped. The camera isn't a trap laid for you personally. It's a quiet, tireless witness standing at one of the few places in modern life where a split-second decision has genuinely life-altering consequences for someone other than the person making it. There's something almost moving about that, if you sit with it. We built a machine whose entire job is to remember the one moment most of us would rather forget. Not out of malice, but because human memory, human attention, and human reflexes are wonderful and fallible things, and intersections are exactly where that fallibility gets expensive. The camera doesn't hate you. It doesn't even know you exist until the precise instant your choices intersect with everyone else's safety. And the fear itself, that flash of, what if I get caught, that little jolt of adrenaline as you approach a yellow light, that's not a malfunction in you either. It's your own internal system doing exactly what it's supposed to do. Flagging a moment where the stakes are higher than they feel. The goal was never to silence that feeling. The goal was to understand it well enough that it stops feeling like a countdown and starts feeling like exactly what it is, a quiet, ordinary reminder to ease off the gas and let the light do what lights have always done. Drive home tonight. Watch the yellow turn to red exactly where it's supposed to, on a timer some tired, careful engineer calculated years ago so that you wouldn't have to do the math yourself at speed, under pressure. Let the camera stay bored. Let it never learn your license plate at all. That's the version of outsmarting it that actually works. But that's just a theory, a catastrophe theory. Thanks for not ruining your life.